Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Real Mental Health Break. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Sean Lesser. I'm the founder of the Real Mental Health Foundation. Really excited to have you here this afternoon. If you're new to the show, what do? We talk about mental health in a host of different areas in life, talking about it with entrepreneurs, people of finance, uh, athletes, a whole host of folks. And I'm really excited to have Bobby Bramhall, a friend of mine, on today, really talking about he's had a super interesting life. There's been ups, there's been downs, there's a lot of changes, and he can really also give us a great insight into the world of athletics and mental health. Bobby, maybe you can give you a little bit of an introduction.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Sean. So my name is Bobby Bramhall. I am a former professional baseball player, 7 years. I'm a adjunct law professor at the University of Tennessee College of Law. I teach sports law and NIL in the law with all this name, image, and likeness stuff popping up these days. I'm an author of a book called Who's on First? Everything Baseball Players and Their Parents Need to Know. And I worked at Texas A&M as an assistant athletics director before starting an NIL company in Nashville. So I stay busy with my wife Claire and our two sheepadoodle puppies, and we live here in Tennessee and are enjoying this change in the seasons right now in the pretty fall.
Yeah,
So
no, it's pretty here in Atlanta too. So Bobby, when we first talked, it was really interesting you talking about your journey, a little bit about baseball and the twists and turns. So can you give us a little bit more insight into your journey in life and where you came from and where you're ending up and where you're going?
oh sure. So sports has always been something I've been deeply involved with. My dad was the director of sports medicine and team physician at Texas A&M for 30 years, 31 years. And so in my career, I had exposure to the best coaches. I was a ball boy for R.C. Slocum, and on the opponent's sideline, seeing Bob Stoops and all the greats come through in College Station. And so I understood at an early age that I had exposure at this special place, and I was a pretty good baseball player. And so I wanted to take my career as far as I could. I played at Rice University in back-to-back College World Series. I was an All-American in 2007, and I got drafted by the Milwaukee Brewers. So I got to play some pro ball. So it was always sports for me. Well, the interesting thing is one day sports ends for everyone as a player. And I always wanted to use my athletic experience on the field to, further my professional career afterwards. So I went to law school thinking I might be a sports agent, not really knowing what the direction would be, and went ahead and became a sports lawyer. And it's kind of exploded into a lot of different opportunities to be an entrepreneur, to be an administrator, and to use the on the field experience back in my legal career. There's very few, folks that have both sides of the page, and they understand it from a player's perspective or just a business operations perspective. And so a lot of folks in my classes say that my perspective in law is different because I was a player and I understand these rights of these athletes and what's happening in NIL especially. And then of course I'm learning more as I'm in the administration sector on the other side of what they're looking for in athletes, and it kind of brings it full circle of who I was as a player and now becoming a professional in the space as a lawyer.
And then, no, thanks, Bobby. And I'm also remembering when we had a conversation more on the mental health side, you were talking about athletes in essence having two deaths of their identity. And I went through something similar on the business side, but maybe you can talk about that a little bit and how that personally affected you and how do you see that happening to other folks? If you
Yeah,
explain what it is.
sure, absolutely. So Alex Rodriguez said it first, I believe, on his show. He said an athlete faces two deaths in their career. One is the death of their identity as an athlete, a baseball player or any other type of athlete. And then the second is the death that we all face, physically. And most people go through their career and have, a pretty steady professional career and then face the physical death that we all do. But the athlete has an identity from basically 5 years old to the last day that they play. And they don't know anything else. Their entire life has revolved around it, from their nutrition, their habits, their aspirations and dreams, their money making ability. It's all in that sport. And so when they die, they have a really tough time not knowing what the next move is. They're truly dead, and they have to kind of reawaken and restart. For me, it was tough because I had that great career. I was 30 years, almost 30 years old, hanging it up. And I had a blank canvas in front of me, knowing one day it would come, but I didn't know which direction I was supposed to move. And for me, I had an injury that I overcame, and I felt like it was a tough break that I had to come back from. And so I always felt that I was becoming better at every level and becoming better because of my injury and because of my hardship or experience. And then one day, all those lessons you learned almost go away, and it's kind of like, well, what now? What was it for? And so for me, I had to turn around and create a purpose and find some type of peace in where I was in the present and where I wanted to go going forward, rather than continuing to dwell on the past or the mistakes I made or the tough breaks that happened. So it's a tough deal. I know A-Rod, he walked away from the game with a really nice purse, right? He got a lot of money and notoriety and opportunity, but he faced the same death because he was a superstar for years, and now he's restarting a career in whether it's Hollywood or I guess announcing sports games. So
And I want to dive into it a little bit more. Like,
yeah,
how did you feel? I don't know when the career exactly ended, but between those two periods, right? It's the transition period, which for me too, because I left my company that I had started 16 years previously, and I kind of lost who I was. Who am I? What's my purpose? And you just kind of in a little bit of a free fall. So and I came through it, but it took a long time. So I'm just curious about that transitionary period for you, because I guess one day they come in and said, "Sorry, Bobby, show's over," or what happened?
yeah. For me, I was at a place where I played in the Puerto Rico Professional League, and my only offer was to go back to the minor leagues where I'd been for several years, and felt like I was kind of spinning my wheels, or go play in Taiwan, which is the one of the lowest leagues of the Asian professional leagues. And so I said, I probably at this point need to read the writing on the wall that even if I feel great, even if I'm becoming better as an athlete, I'm not getting these opportunities anymore. And so I voluntarily said, stop playing baseball, go back and restart and create a new identity for yourself with the things that you've learned as a player. And I'll get real honest with you. I was lost. It was
Mm-hmm.
tough. And, I felt like you did. I felt that there was a lot of wasted time, and I didn't have a true direction or purpose into what was going on. And I'll tell you this, I sought a lot of counselors to try and help me out. And there's very few people who have worked with professional athletes or really understand that story. And so most of the people I've visited with just patted me on the head and told me how lucky I was in my life, and I needed
Mm-hmm.
to count my blessings. And I think while that's true on one hand, I think everything is relative. And if you were a top performer, you're going to have different struggles from that experience than somebody who is just getting their first meal in the week, and
Sure.
that's a different struggle. And so we don't need to grade ourselves with everybody who's next to us. We need to grade ourselves based on where we are. And so I finally found a counselor that kind of met me where I was and understood very high elite performers and what they go through mentally, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of steered me in a really positive direction, because it was extremely tough to let go all of that overnight. And the way I see it, and you probably see it the same way, is in a professional career, you have a million chances to restart. You fail a business, you know what? You raise money again and you try it again, and you learn from your mistakes, and you might actually make leaps and bounds where you would have been with that one business because of what you learned in your failures. And in sports, for whatever reason, failure is sometimes not an option. It's
Mm-hmm.
what have you done for me lately? And, what's your projectability? And so even if you're 28 years old and you're not even at the prime of your career, maybe 31, 32 is the prime of your career, you don't have that chance because there's so many new draft picks and so much media exposure to these young kids that are coming up, that they go ahead and just say, yeah, we're not going to give you an opportunity anymore, even though you're 7 years ahead of those other folks. I'll tell you what, on Wall Street, I think you've been in that space. If you're 7 years ahead of somebody, you know a lot more than other people, and you may be a
Sure.
better performer in many ways. You may be trusted to lead a company. Well, in sports, it's very different. It's who are you on the field? What are your raw physical tools? And those are the chances you get. And so I felt like, man, I have spent 30 years in this sport. I was becoming better every day. and there wasn't a chance to restart. You're just kind of told this is the end. And so what do you do with that? What you have to do is you have to move on and you have to create a new identity and realize that all those lessons along the way created who you are and give you more opportunities. But man, it hurts. And man, you're lost for a while. I know there's a lot of guys that are going through that. It makes me sad because there was never a support group for guys that were truly going through, such a time. And that's why alcoholism and drug abuse is rampant among, ex-professional athletes, because they really struggle with what to do with those days that they were on top and worked so hard to get there.
Sure. Then no, that makes sense. And that's one of our focuses at the Real. I think a big part of the Real is, and how I got healthy is community, right? So where do those people you're kind of, and now you hear it all the time when guys retire or they leave a sport, they say, I just miss hanging out with the guys, right? A lot of times you hear that. So how do you handle that? What did you do? How do you build community when, in essence, they just closed the door? And I'm not going to say they gave you the boot, and then you're like, okay, my whole crew, everyone I talk to, everyone I speak to, is in this locker room, right? And now you have to start over.
That's the hardest thing about it, Sean, is I felt a lot of shame from that. You have these guys that you've spent maybe 6-7 years with, and they depend on you, and you've been through a lot of struggles together, and you're very close. And then you get the boot, and you're kind of not even contacted by them anymore. I remember when guys would get released, and it was hard. What do you say, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're on to the next thing and struggling with their family or whatever, and it's hard to connect with them. And so you're in that position, not even knowing, what those relationships actually meant. So you go through this time of trying to find that community, because I felt shame. I think a lot of people will feel either guilt or anxiety on the future or something. For me, I felt like I had disappointed expectation, and I never knew that word until I found a book that maybe a listener needs to hear today. It was called Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety. And I'll have to look up the author, but it goes through, those are the 3 negative emotions that humans deal with. And you usually deal with one over the others. Like, I'm going to deal with shame, you're going to deal with guilt, somebody else is going to deal with the anxiety part. And it kind of legitimized and validated my feelings that there was a disappointed expectation, and that was okay to have gone through that. And it wasn't shame from something I did or didn't do. It was just shame from what my expectations of myself were. And that's tough to deal with when you lose friends and have no community to support you through a failure, to say, no, man, we were close with you. And so for me, my college friends were very close. They're all still my best friends that we went to Omaha together and are, as close as we were back then, still today. And then my law school friends became my family. So you dive into law school, you get real close with people because you're studying hard. And the University of Tennessee became a very special place for me because it was a true new page in the chapter of my life from transitioning out of baseball.
No, that sounds awesome. And then let's transition a little bit and let's talk about now what you're doing, also with student athletes, with the NIL, etc. Can you just fill us in a little bit, and then we'll go down that trail there?
Sure. Yes. So I teach NIL and the law at the University of Tennessee, and it was the first law school class that was NIL related. And it's the right of publicity. And we went through all of the state statutes and all these federal bills that are trying to be passed. We went through the NCAA bylaws and how, the NCAA has basically opened the door to allow NIL into their organization. It's been interesting though, because as far as athletes go, there's the 2% that are making a lot of the money from basically donor pools, and that's not really NIL. NIL is, name, image, and likeness for your, income for your name, image, and likeness through businesses and commercial opportunities, like entertainers and artists have always had the privilege to do. NIL at the college level right now is a lot of these donor collectives are being fed to give these kids a recruiting advantage to come to a school. So that's a little bit different. And we're calling it NIL because it is legal to be, accept money to show up to a tailgate or to do an Instagram post. But the 98% are needing to grab opportunities through businesses or go to the local, Toyota dealership and, have an opportunity there. So I'm educating the industry. I'm educating the students in my class of what the legal ramifications are around that. Now, our company called Athlete Licensing Company is a business operations software that manages the transactions and manages the relationships between these collectives and universities and athletes. It allows the athletes to have a platform to see what they're making, contract review, any red flags that they have in their name, image, and likeness contracts that they need to get resolved to make sure they're staying compliant and making sure that they're making the money that they can maximize for themselves in this really brief time that they're going to be famous as a college athlete. So it's been a blast, organizing it and getting it together. And now we've got staff that run the day to day and make sure that this, continues to be an asset for the industry as these companies are popping up. It was chaos before then. It's still pretty chaotic, but there's a lot of good companies that are out there that are managing it for these athletes.
And then on that, now let's just pretend I'm in college, right? I'm a freshman. I'm a great basketball player, right? And all of a sudden, I'm getting these contracts and this money, and that's terrific. But there's also kind of how you deal with that, the mental health side, all the attention. You're basically going from high school into a semi-college / work environment, and that's got to be. I mean, it's great, you're making the money, but how do you help those athletes really understand and I'm not going to say get through it, I think it's a positive, but deal with it?
Sure. They've got to understand that off the field is just as important now as on the field. And so your off the field behavior and how you're, presenting yourself is your accelerator or on the field. It's, creates a lot of advantages for you, but it's also your cushion and your padding so that you're creating a lifestyle whenever your career is over, that maybe you've developed a lot of business experience and understand how to engage and how to be, a public figure instead of just being a really great, wide receiver or something like that. When one day then that's over, you have no other skills to take but your football skills. So there's a lot to come from off the field behavior, in my opinion, that they need to understand. At 19 years old, it's now just as important as it was, 10 years ago for folks that were 25 years old, finally entering the workforce after college.
Now, are there groups? I mean, that's great what you're saying, but how do they learn from people advising them on these things, or how do they, what's the what does it look like?
Sure.
The landscape.
So, yeah, there's a lot of, the 2% is going to have an agent representation. So they're going to have publicists and training and a lot of understanding of how to engage in these opportunities. But the good thing is schools have a mandatory requirement to provide NIL education to all their athletes. So they are getting some type of training. Now, I do think the NCAA needs to require and allow, personal representatives, fiduciaries to handle accounting and do some things for these athletes so they're not just lost running around with their 1099s, not even knowing how to file and where the money came from. They really do need more oversight if they're going to allow this kind of money to all of a sudden be in the bank accounts of 19-year-olds. Right. So it's a little bit chaotic on that end, but they are educating and they're providing resources at least to reach out to and to guide them. So it's now up to the athlete to go seek those out and do a better job of understanding that this is not just play monopoly money. It's real career money that can provide a nest egg for their future.
And then you were also telling me a little bit about the story about Texas A&M and the students on the mental health side. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So when I was at Texas A&M, I know that we were continuing to hire more sports psychologists, and I know a couple here at Tennessee, and I know the folks over at A&M, and they were continuing to hire them because from 8 to 5, their schedules were completely packed with student athletes that had, whether it was mental health issues or on the field issues, someone they needed to speak with. And so looking back, there was maybe one when I was in college that handled more serious issues. Maybe you're having a very, deep life crisis, but now you have everything from eating disorders to, issues with coaches that I believe need that, one-on-one counseling. And so they were hiring left and right to try and keep up with the demand of these student athletes and everything they're facing, even from social media and all the pressures that we didn't have as a college athlete when it wasn't so much exposure.
Right.
Something else I'll say is, Dr. Kim Quigley, who we both know, she has, On Rise that works with athletes. And it's interesting. I read a post the other day that she put out of another sports psychologist who said he works for the organization, and the organization has, a duty to, provide these athletes with this opportunity to get mental health counseling. But then the counselor's duty is to report back to the organization. And
Sure.
I definitely disagree with what he said there. And I think she
Mhm.
did too. I think disclosure of telling the athlete who you work for, that this, is or is not protected by HIPAA, and it only being a benefit to the athlete. So it should only be trickle down. It should not be a benefit to report back and say this athlete isn't in a good place or going through a struggle or shouldn't be on the team next year. I totally disagree with, if you're going to provide those resources, you need to do it just to benefit your athletes, not to say, let's get more information on how to make our organization better. So that's been interesting to see, because I know there's a lot of money being injected into pro and college sports to, beef up the mental health awareness, but it needs to be only for the players and the administrators who need that counseling, in my opinion.
I didn't know about that, but that makes a lot of sense because I'm just thinking about it is if I'm an athlete and you're saying that you're feeding everything back that I'm saying back to the team, I am not going to tell you the truth if I'm really
That's right.
not feeling well because it's going to be used possibly against me. So I don't know how that's helpful, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like why you're reporting this to the world or maybe to the organization or whatever it is. So that's interesting. And
That's
then
right.
Bobby, can you talk a little bit about, now we talked about the college, but then you also work with younger folks, and you also have your book. Can you give us a little insight into that?
Absolutely. So we wrote a book called Who's on First? Everything Baseball Players and Their Parents Need to Know. And it's a book that covers from little league to the big leagues and everything in between, from, the performance aspect through the mental health awareness. We actually have an entire chapter dedicated to the mental edge. We've got strength and conditioning, nutrition, that whole side, but also the path from tournament baseball, junior college, college, professional, at every level, and showing a parent what their investments are going to, become for their athletes and what their athletes going to face through the recruiting processes or through scouts in the stands. And we're super excited about how it's been received. I get texts all the time from a dad who's on page 91 reading to his kid every night about, what they need to be to become a big leaguer or just be better at their sport. So we counsel, we do consulting for facilities and all types of parents and players who really need that. And it's been fun because I think there's more to it than just physical play. I think there's so much emotional and mental involvement in sport that it's really what you have up here that creates who you become on the field. And to me, that's a mental health strength. I think my career, I was left-handed, which was beneficial, but otherwise it was based on what I knew and the experiences I had that gave me success on the field, not necessarily being 6'6" and throwing 97 miles an hour.
And I know that's interesting. And then on my side, my daughter, she's a good soccer player, travel and all those different things. And I just think about when I was a decent athlete myself, but it just feels like there's so much more pressure on even high school and younger folks, and it's just intense in terms of all these, pitching training, this training, that training. We never really had this whole mechanism. I don't know. There's a good side to it, but that's also puts a ton of pressure on the kids. I don't know what your take is on that.
Yeah, we talk about it a lot. I think at 10, 11, 12, you have to dive deep and you become great at your sport. Still have something off the field that's super important for you, and don't wrap your entire identity around it. Do great in school, care about your family, develop character and integrity. But if you're 13, 14, 15, starting baseball at least, there's a very low chance that you're going to have career success, maybe
Sure.
with no ceiling, except for the guy named Lorenzo Cain, who I think he was a World Series MVP, definitely an All-Star. Lorenzo Cain was my center fielder when I was in Double A with the Brewers, and he started playing baseball at like 14, 15 years old in high school and was
Wow.
very raw. So he's the exception. Everybody else really needs to have that hand-eye coordination and throwing motion down before 10 years old. I'm kind of against this 6, 7-year-old tournament baseball because I don't even know if they're even out of kindergarten to know, the things that they need to be successful on the field. So I think there is a too early, but once you become 10, 11 years old, you need to start playing a lot of serious baseball and just being really good at it to be good. And that's a balance. I mean, maybe some families choose not to do that, and that's perfectly okay too, because it's a business. You pay for parking now, you pay for jerseys and tournament fees. It's crazy. You know how it goes.
And then the other side of that is, and I've been, my kids in baseball, soccer, basketball, is sometimes you can't handle the parents, right? That are just, some of them are out of control, right? And you can't really look to the kid to look at the parent. So that happens a lot. So I don't know I don't know if there's any advice on that. I mean, it's difficult.
I would say as a parent, it's important to love your kid and to give them opportunities. But I mean, beating another dad to death in the parking lot because of a call the umpire made in the 5th inning, I mean, there's no reason for that and no need. And it doesn't even matter. I mean, we look back on our careers and anything that happened pre-college, I mean, it was a great experience, but it doesn't matter that much in the scheme of your career. So as a parent, I would say step back and stop living through your kids and just be a support for your kids. Let them come to you, and instead of trying to control every aspect and, fight parents in the parking lot over it. So.
Yeah, I've seen some of that. It's been a little bit crazy.
Sure.
Bobby, we're getting towards the end, and I'm just thinking in my mind, you've had an interesting life, an interesting career. You worked with, in the major leagues, worked with college students, younger people. You got the law side. So, what are some three things, some advice you'd give to people? I'm going to say it from the mental health perspective, being in all these different places that folks out there might focus on that helped you.
Sure. I would say, fame, notoriety, and money only makes you more of what you already are. And so becoming your best version of yourself way before those opportunities come is, in my opinion, the best way to truly have a stable mental state and career going forward. I would say developing an identity outside of maybe your profession does help for bumps in the road. You know that you're maybe not going to play forever or work in this career field forever, but that doesn't define who you are. There's so much more that could or should be valuable to you, even though your devotion to your career should be paramount and, follow your dreams. And I would say my last thing is probably, I've said this before, finding peace in your purpose where you know your path and you're not just doing it for the money or for the fame. You're doing it because it's an expression of who you are and you're, helping the world in some way by giving your time or your efforts. In my opinion, that's allowing you to have peace there and realizing that you're doing good work outside of just a paycheck. It's tough though. Like you said, it's once that happens to you and you lose that identity for a short time, maybe just being still and being calm in the event that you have a huge, release from your job in some way, instead of rushing into the next thing. That really helped me. I took about a year and tried to understand where I was and what was next. And that provided a better path than just jumping into the next thing. I actually got a pitching coach job offer at a D1 school when I was still playing. And it was at the end of my career. And I just wasn't ready to stop pitching yet. And I also wasn't ready to just make a career out of only baseball. And so I took a minute and I paused and I realized I probably didn't want to start throwing batting practice immediately after I was done playing, and realized I could always come back to that if I wanted to.
Sure. No, I think those are helpful hints. So, Bobby, I got to say, I appreciate you being on the show. I also appreciate you supporting the Real and being involved with the Real, because I think there's a lot of guys out there that are, athletes, finance people. It doesn't matter who it is, go through struggles in different ways. The loss of identity happens in a lot of stages of life, wherever you are, and also to know that those things are going to happen. It's going to be tough, but there's, you always get through it. because sometimes you just think you're not going to get through this, right? So go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, I was going to say one more thing. Thank you for doing this. Whenever I finished playing baseball, I needed a group more than anything, and I thought about doing a performer for professional athletes group, or just like guys that had to hang up the cleats or got released and what they were struggling with. And I think this is the platform. You guys are doing what that is, to be heard and to be validated and to understand the struggles of other folks. That community is everything, because you really do feel validated whenever you hear other stories as well. So appreciate you making the effort to make this happen.
Thanks, Bobby, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again.
Thanks, Sean.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.